Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the Business Case for Clean Water webinar. My name is Colton Fagundes. I am a Senior Policy Manager at the American Sustainable Business Council. At ASBC, we are the leading business organization serving the public policy interest of responsible companies, their customers, and their stakeholders. So for today's webinar, we have brought together a great group of business leaders together with clean water advocates and policymakers to show the breadth of support for clean water protections. Polluted water can wreck economies and communities, from breweries to outdoor outfitters, lakeside retailers to shellfish harvesters. The businesses that power our economy and support our communities need the same thing as our families: clear and consistent safeguards for our water. Businesses rely on water to create jobs, invest in and empower cities, towns, and states. We don't have to choose between the environment and a healthy economy, but we do have to choose between common sense protections for clean water and letting a handful of polluters have free reign to dump into and destroy our waterways. So getting started, we have for our agenda today, we're going to start with John Devine from Natural Resource Defense Council, who's going to give us an overview of the latest in clean water policy, the Navigable Waters Protection Rule, and the process of repealing and replacing that rule. Then we're going to go over, we have a statement from Senator Ben Cardin, who unfortunately was not able to make it today, but did record a statement for us that we'll be showing for the first time. Then we're going to pass it over to Congressman Bobby Scott from Virginia, who has graciously given us quite a bit of his time today. And he is going to give a statement on the importance of clean water and his work within Congress on clean water protections. Then we're going to pass it over to our panel of business leaders. We have Avi Garbo from Patagonia, Dominique Lukanoff from Hugo New, Rick Bauman from Murals Inlet Seafood, and Ryan Bethea from Oysters, Carolina. Then we're going to have some time for Q&A at the end. And now that I'm bringing up Q&A, I'll just ask that if you have questions throughout the webinar, and please do try to think of questions, please go ahead and insert them into that Q&A box you'll see there at the bottom of your Zoom client. Do not use the chat, or please do not use the chat for asking questions and answers, or asking questions. And before I pass it over to John, just really quick, I'm going to mention 2 ways that you can all get involved. We'll be sharing these links in the follow-up, as well as mentioning them again at the end of the webinar, but wanted to share them just ahead of time. Coming up, the EPA and Army Corps are holding listening sessions on revising the definition of the waters of the United States. We've provided in this link here some material, well, an opportunity for you to register for those listening sessions. And also, if you register through this link, you'll be provided with messaging guidance on making the business case for clean water. We'll also be able to get in contact with you if you need further assistance in preparing your testimony. On August 25th is a session specifically for small entities and small businesses, though there are other registration dates that you'll find through that link there. Another way you can get involved is by signing on to our business sign-on letter calling for the repeal and replacement of the Navigable Waters Protection Rule. We will be submitting that sign-on letter to the EPA and Army Corps as part of these listening sessions that they've organized. And again, we'll be sharing these links after the webinar. All right, to get started, I'm going to pass it to our first panelist, John Devine. Please take it away.
Thanks a bunch, Colton, and hello, folks. Thanks for having me join today, and thanks particularly to the American Sustainable Business Council and our business and congressional leaders for this terrific forum. My name is John Devine. I direct federal clean water advocacy at the Natural Resources Defense Council. I'm here to talk briefly about the current status of the Biden administration's efforts to undo some of the worst water policies implemented by the Trump administration, in particular, a regulation that we call the Dirty Water Rule. In general, the administration is moving in the right direction on clean water, but not acting fast enough to address the harms that Trump-era actions are inflicting on our waters. On his first day in office, President Biden directed agencies to reevaluate all of the environmental actions taken in the prior 4 years and to repeal, fix, or replace those that were inconsistent with his administration's commitment to the environment. In keeping with that directive, EPA has announced its intention to revise several regulations and has begun to solicit stakeholder input on what to change, but is not committed to speedy timetables for any of those new rules. And in the interim is allowing the Trump rules to remain in place while it considers its next step. That dynamic is playing out in particularly with the worst of these Trump administration water rules, the dirty water rule. Last year, EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers together issued a regulation excluding millions of miles of streams and tens of millions of acres of wetlands from essential pollution safeguards in the Clean Water Act. That means that these waters are at risk of being destroyed or polluted without any action to mitigate their harm that will result from the discharge. Recently, those same agencies acknowledged that the regulation is having, quote, destructive impacts to critical water bodies, but they have not yet proposed to repeal the Trump rule, leaving communities around the country at increased risk of dirtier water and worsened flooding. The sooner it's eliminated, the better. The administration, as you'll hear about, is currently taking public comment on how it should move forward on this issue, and it is critical that they hear from a broad range of stakeholders, especially businesses that rely on and care about clean water, that they need to repeal the Trump rule immediately. I encourage everyone who can to participate in those ongoing processes, and I really appreciate this opportunity to be with you today. Thanks very much.
Thank you, John. All right, just 1 second here as I pull up our statement, our pre-recorded statement from Senator Cardin. And thank you all again for joining, and please enjoy this.
Colton, there's no sound in case you hadn't.
Yeah, Colton, we'll work on getting some audio. I think there's some tips in the chat for how to get that working. I think you have to share.
Oh, sorry, all, you're not able to hear the
No,
statement?
you have to put that on as well.
Oh my gosh.
He's speaking in slow motion also, Colton.
Okay, apologies. We're going to return to this a little bit later. And for now, I'm going to pass it over to Congressman Scott. Congressman, are you there?
Yep, can you hear me?
All right, thank you for coming to the rescue as we have these technical difficulties. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and please take it away, Congressman.
Good, thank you, and good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you. And I want to thank the American Sustainable Business Council and the Southern Environmental Law Center and the Natural Resources Defense Council for coming together for this important event. Now, I'm personally honored to represent Virginia's 3rd Congressional District, where the James River, Nansemond River, and the Elizabeth Rivers meet the Chesapeake Bay. And I've spent my legislative career working to restore the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries, starting back when I served in the Virginia State House of Delegates. That was my first year as a member of the House of Delegates in 1978. I was appointed to be a part of the joint Virginia-Maryland Legislative Advisory Commission, focused on determining what actions were necessary to address Bay issues. The first conclusion, of course, we came to is that if Virginia and Maryland worked together, it'd be a waste of time unless we had the other states actually actively participating. And so we got the other states in the watershed to join in and form the Chesapeake Bay Commission. The Clean Water Act had passed only a few years prior and provided a new set of tools to allow states to work together to restore the Chesapeake Bay. With over 64,000 square miles of watershed, that includes 6 states and the District of Columbia, coordinated and committed to collaborative action necessary to restore America's most productive estuary. And it also includes 3,600 species of plants, fish, and animals for which it is their home. Here in Hampton Roads, like the rest of the watershed, healthy tributaries and a healthy Chesapeake Bay are vital to the environment, the economy and businesses, recreation, wildlife, and frankly, our way of life. Today, I have the honor of serving as one of the co-chairs of the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Task Force in the U.S. House of Representatives. The interstate cooperation, strong enforcement of the Clean Water Act, and working with federal and private partners remain as important to our work to conserve, restore, and protect the Bay as ever. The task force advocates funding for programs that support the Bay's recovery, including the Environmental Protection Agency's Chesapeake Bay Program, the oyster restoration programs, funds to support farmers seeking to implement best management practices, and for programs that provide our students opportunities to engage with the watershed. I'm also pleased to share that earlier this summer, the House passed appropriations bills providing full funding to a new grant program that established by law, led by Senators Van Hollen and Capito and Representatives Sarbanes, Whitman, and myself, the Chesapeake Watershed Investments for Landscape Defense Act, or the Chesapeake Wild Act for short. This new program will help fund on-the-ground work to restore habitat, enhance recreation, filter drinking water, and improve overall health of the Bay. The purpose of the Clean Water Act is clear: to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of our nation's waters. Over the years, the authority of the EPA to uphold clean water plans and the Bay's total maximum daily load or pollution diet under the Clean Water Act have been challenged, but have thankfully been upheld by the courts. However, actions by the previous administration, which have already been referenced, which issued a rule under the guise of deregulation, undermined this bedrock environmental policy and threatened the Chesapeake Bay as well as its streams and wetlands nationwide. As in fact, under the Trump administration's policy, nearly half of the nation's wetlands would no longer be protected by federal regulations. And that's why I read a letter along with my fellow Chesapeake Bay Watershed Task Force members, Representative Sarbanes and Senators Cardin and Van Hollen, urging the administration to rescind the Trump administration's Navigable Waters Protection Rule. I'm pleased that the administration is taking steps to undo the damage inflicted by this and other important EPA programs by the previous administration. Thankfully, the Biden administration recognizes the importance of protecting the administration and ensuring access to clean drinking water. The recent reports on climate change show that if we don't act now to protect the planet, we will lose that opportunity for generations. As we build back better, the Biden administration and Congress are hard at work to enact the Americans Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan. The bipartisan infrastructure bill that just passed the Senate would make the largest investment in clean drinking water and wastewater infrastructure in our nation's history, delivering clean water to millions of families. The infrastructure deal would also help us tackle a climate crisis by making the largest investment in clean water transmission and electric vehicle infrastructure in our nation's history. And I can assure you that Congress and the administration intend to build on the progress of the bipartisan infrastructure deal as we draft the larger bill to address all of the environmental challenges that we face. We can all work together to tackle the climate crisis and ensure that we restore the bay and ensure that everyone has safe drinking water. Let me just close by pointing out one area that is important to my home area in Southeast Virginia, and that is sea level rise, which is closely associated with these issues. The Southeast Virginia, Hampton Roads area, second to New Orleans in risk to sea level rise. We have come together and addressing it the best we can. We recognize that in the next few years, 1 foot of sea level rise is baked in, and 4 to 7 feet by the end of the century are the consensus estimates of sea level rise. That if we don't do something now, that'll have catastrophic implications to businesses, recreation, real estate, and about everything else in Hampton Roads if we fail to act. So I want to thank you for all of the work that you do to protect drinking water and restore the ecosystems, including the Chesapeake Bay, and to address our climate. And I look forward to the comments of the other panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Congressman, and thank you for all of the great work that you're doing. I'm going to try one more time before we pass it over to our business leader panelists to show our statement from Senator Cardin. Bear with me for one moment.
Hi, I'm Senator Ben Cardin. I'm proud to represent the people of Maryland in the United States Senate on the Environment and Public Works Committee and as chair of the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee. Let me first thank our partners, the American Sustainable Business Council, along with the Natural Resources Defense Council, Southern Environmental Law Center, and Environmental America, for making the business case for clean water today. It is an honor to join Congressman Bobby Scott, whose leadership on the House Chesapeake Bay Watershed Task Force has benefited our region. Clean water is essential for Maryland small businesses, from breweries to bike shops. It is also critical for the health of the Chesapeake Bay, an economic engine as well as a national treasure. I made these points in a letter to EPA with Representative Scott and Sarbanes, urging the agency to act quickly to repeal the Navigable Waters Protection Act as soon as possible. This dirty water rule proposed by the Trump administration impedes the Clean Water Act, which is the bedrock protection for our cherished waters that support recreation, wildlife, and heritage in the Mid-Atlantic. I enjoy exploring the C&O Canal by bicycle along the Potomac River, a tributary and source of drinking water for millions of Marylanders. I know that I'm not alone. I encourage small businesses and environmentalists to continue to work together to put a face on the issue of water resources, especially where we are making progress. The bipartisan infrastructure package includes over $200 million for the EPA's Chesapeake Bay program, a ground-up effort built on the Clean Water Act. I am proud to have recently authored legislation that reauthorized the program to receive appropriations. Now that the Senate has reached an agreement on infrastructure, we must complement these historic investments with durable, science-based policies that ensure clean, safe water for all our communities long into the future. Thank you, and have a productive roundtable.
All right, and as we're moving on to our business leader panelist, I'm just going to give a quick reminder. If you have questions for either the Congressman or for any of our other panelists, please put them into the Q&A box that is at the bottom of your Zoom client. All right, and now I'm going to pass it on to Avi Garbo.
Thanks, Colton, and it's really great to be with you all. Congressman Scott, I'm a fellow Virginian, so thank you for your comments, and really delighted to be part of this group. Let me just start out by telling folks a little bit about Patagonia. Patagonia is a company based in Ventura, California. We are in business to save the home planet. It's a bit of an unusual mission statement for a for-profit enterprise, but we have shown, I think, for 50 years that you can, in fact, be economically successful, grow your communities and your customer base, while at the same time really being a strong advocate for environmental protection. And that's really, I think, what brings these business leaders and others together. Part of what we do at Patagonia, and I'm going to break it down a little bit to give you a sense of where our kind of connections to clean water is. We have, among other things, a fairly robust fishing and fly fishing business where we sell apparel and other gear to hundreds of small and medium-sized businesses, mostly in rural communities around the country, kind of creating jobs and getting people into the outdoors. We are also a food business, and Colton, you mentioned at the outset, kind of food and breweries are certainly invested in clean water. Among the offerings of our food business is a line of great beers that Patagonia brews using Kernza, which is an interesting grain, kind of known to kind of help the climate for its ability to have roots deep in the soil and to retain water. So there are all sorts of reasons, I think, that you could come up, just looking at the Patagonia website, why we might care about clean water. But beyond that, we are also part of the outdoor industry, the outdoor recreation industry. And this is a kind of a sector of the economy that's extraordinarily strong, over 5 million jobs nationwide in that particular sector. I think consumer spending of nearly 800 billion and growing every year. We're also a B Corp, a benefit corp. The first, I think, in the state of California. There are benefit corporations perhaps also on the line. And part of our mission, if you will, and our articles of incorporation is a dedication to treating the environment as a stakeholder, not just one's shareholders. And so those are all of the reasons, among many others, why clean water is important to Patagonia. But none of that needs to make any difference to any of you or the other businesses on the line. And for me, and I think this is really where Patagonia is coming from, is we need to, as businesses, recognize that every one of us has a couple things in common. We all have employees, we all are situated in communities, and we all have customers. And every one of those things, employees, communities, and customers, absolutely relies upon clean water. And so it is in our own interests, if you will, as the business community, to really invest in this fight, I think, for clean water. John gave a good description earlier about kind of what's at stake. We have referred to the Trump era rules as the dirty water rule, and we need to make sure that this administration repeals that and replaces it with very strong standards. Most of the waters that were left unprotected by that dirty water rule are wetlands and ephemeral and intermittent streams. These are the very streams that are the headwaters of rivers and lakes and so on that provide drinking water to nearly a third of all Americans. So again, many reasons why as businesses we need to care. And I guess the last thing I wanted to offer is that, I've spent many years myself in kind of prior parts of my career at the Environmental Protection Agency, and I can assure you that businesses who oppose strong environmental standards will attend these meetings, they will engage, they will get involved in the litigation, and those business coalitions and entities will be at the table. It is imperative that businesses like ours, supported by the American Sustainable Business Council, show up, get engaged, and make it very clear to our lawmakers and to the executive branch that businesses stand behind strong environmental protections. They go hand in hand, and in fact, we rely upon them. So I'm encouraged by this showing and happy to kind of turn it over to Dominique or whoever's following me. Thanks.
Thank you, Avi. Going to pass it over to Dominique, and Dominique has some slides to share as well, so I'm going to pull those up for her.
Thank you, and thanks for having Hugo New here today, this very important topic. I want to thank Congressman Scott. I spent many a year working for EPA's Mid-Atlantic region, and of course, working on policies and programs to protect the Chesapeake Bay and the thousands of communities and economies that it supports, and having you and Senator Cardin and others as champions has been pivotal. So appreciate the ability to still help towards this cause for our waters. So the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit about Hugo New. Hugo New actually was at one point one of the world's third largest metals recyclers. And its DNA has actually been about prevention and beneficial reuse. One of the businesses that we have, and we still have electronics recycling, one of the businesses we have is called Corning Point. It's actually an adaptive redevelopment site, a former brownfield in an industrialized corridor. It was hit by Sandy and under 4 to 5 feet of water. And instead of doing the easy thing that many do in these sort of forgotten industrialized corridors that tend to have many EJ areas, opportunity zones that still need to see the opportunity for the people who reside there, Hugo New, Wendy New and John New decided we're not going to warehouse. We're going to rebuild something transformative that helps to continue to restore this environment, the water, the air, the land. We're also going to enable people who have barriers to entry, such as returning citizens, to get trained and have good paying jobs. But we also want to attract and house those who want to fight climate through technology, those small entrepreneurs and medium-sized businesses that need space for acceleration of these types of solutions. So we now actually house, and so therefore that Corning Point was then transformed into a mix of modern office space. We attract green, clean technology. We work very closely with the state in all matters, environmentally, economically, and we consider ourselves, just as we were at the origination of that site as a federal shipbuilding site, contributing to the local economy. We continue to be that anchor and that driver supporting social justice, economic redevelopment, and of course, environment. And I was attracted, particularly having had a career at EPA, to find enlightened developers who were focused on 21st century resilient redevelopment. Most land is privately owned. And so it is very important to have this investment and engagement of the private sector. We really cannot afford dirty water. In fact, next slide. We're also proud to be a member of ASCB. Here are all our rivers and streams in this country, over 3.5 million miles. The major riverine systems are here, but you can see the connectedness. And as we talk about dirty water rule, we talk about how many wetlands we've lost and what those wetlands provide us. Sandy, thank goodness for the marshes and wetlands that we still have in the Hudson area, in the Passaic and Hackensack rivers that actually prevented much loss, along with taking on many of the impacts and the hits. And that's why we're also dedicated to restoring the wetlands around our property. But this is the point here, is that it's all connected. The other aspect of these ephemeral streams, think about droughts that are now happening and how we have short-circuited the hydrologic cycle, and not allowing for water to actually refill our storage supplies, our groundwater and our rivers. So I thought this was a very impactful slide, and I'll tell you, I'll quickly go through some of the next slides just to give you an idea why we care. Latest data in terms of the assessment of our water bodies, bottom line is we're not meeting the needs and the conditions. If we were doing very well today, that would be another matter, but we're not. So we should not be reversing an opportunity to not only address water quality and watershed protection and public health, but importantly, the climate, as we know, we're now in code red. Next slide. What we also know is we're experiencing these extremes across the country, depending upon where you are. I actually live in near the Delaware River. I've never experienced so many tornado warnings. I grew up in the New Orleans area. I grew up with hurricanes, but now different parts of the country are having to familiarize themselves with tornadoes and hurricanes that never happened before. And of course, the devastating wildfires and drought. This is all connected. It's all connected to the importance of protecting those water bodies and watersheds. Next slide. They also take on, they address flooding. And in addition, wetlands are sort of considered the kidneys of our watersheds. So to actually dismiss them is something that we really can't afford. It cannot be pollution first, pay later. So if you look at this slide, just right in the center, I just want to bring you to the attention of why it is so important to us, beyond the global importance that we see in having these kinds of models to address climate, where we can show how we can bring it all together sustainably. We're a peninsula. We're surrounded by the Passaic River on the left and the Hackensack River on the right. And if we think about these rivers, and there's the Great Swamp up in the headwaters of the Passaic that are not only ecologically important, but increasingly important for addressing the devastating impacts of climate. In the Hackensack, we've got the Meadowlands. And as I mentioned earlier, thank goodness for the wet Meadowlands. We're at the bottom of everything. We're downstream of everyone. And one of the questions we have is, as we want to attract those who want good paying jobs and who want to address climate, who want to accelerate that and demonstrate circular economies, we are dealing with sea level rise and we are dealing with storm surge. We have done studies to look at how much water is coming onto our property. Over 20% of the water that we get comes from offsite sources. We're pretty much all impervious in that area. Infrastructure, 55 billion for water, 155 billion. We want to see that as a business. If we are investing in $1 billion redevelopment for these purposes, which we want to transfer to other areas, that we've got some opportunity for support upstream. It would not make sense to continue to do this and nothing is being done upstream. Luckily, the state of New Jersey has passed legislation for green infrastructure, for climate, but we want to use these opportunities. In the next slide, we'll show a bit of the studies that we're doing to look at coastal dynamics around Corny Point. How does sea level rise, riverine flooding, storm surge, and wave impacts impact our site? We have raised the site 16 feet, 4 feet above FEMA in order to address resilience. But we've got to kind of stop at some point and ask ourselves, how much longer do we, just as a single business, continue to do this when there's warehousing around us? The Hackensack is just named as a Superfund site. Well, let's talk about how we got there. It wasn't through clean water. Many of the pollutants, mercury, we've got pathogens from CSOs, we've got deteriorated infrastructure that's treating the effects of dirty water. And as Avi mentioned earlier, this is our source water. It's our recreational water. It's the water that we're gonna need in a drought. And as we say, use rain as a resource. So we are paying for what really we should be preventing. And so the next slide finally talks about these overland flows and the studies that we're doing, and we will be happy to share this. We've done a case study with American Sustainable Business Council about how much water 800 acre feet hits our 130 acre site, and how we are working to find those kinds of practices and to share this information to truly achieve the balance of a society with overall resilience. And therefore, we really need to do all we can to maximize what the Clean Water Act is there to do. And it is to ensure the integrity of clean and safe water for us, for our ecosystems, and for the future. So thanks for having us here today.
Thank you, Dominique. And we will share the case study that Dominique mentioned in the follow-up, and also any other reports as they become available. I'm going to pass it on to our next business leader panelist. Rick, take it away.
Hello, I'm Rick Bauman, founder of Murrells Inlet Seafood, a company located in the northern coastal plain of South Carolina. It is indeed a pleasure for me to again participate in a forum with Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland.
Rick, sorry to interrupt. Could you adjust your camera? We can't see your face. We'd love to see your face as we're talking to you.
I'm trying to get in the right direction. That's about as far as it goes, buddy.
Okay, that's better. Thank you.
I'm
Appreciate it.
sitting straight up now. Okay?
All right, thanks.
So I'm glad that I'm participating again with Senator Ben. Senator Cardin's district includes the Great Chesapeake Bay, where many of his constituents work on the bay as watermen, a direct parallel to where I live and work in Murrells Inlet, South Carolina, just a few miles up the road from the Winyah Bay, the second biggest estuary on the East Coast. I do believe that Senator Cardin, and really anyone who lives or works in our two areas, would readily agree to the fact that clean water is essential to our livelihoods, quality of life, and our economies in general. The Clean Water Act was written and negotiated into law under the initial direction of President Richard Nixon. My late friend, Dr. Ian W. Marceau, played a major role in bringing the act into existence, and he would be quite appalled to see what has happened to it during the last administration. Small streams and headwaters, which flow into protected wetlands and other larger bodies of water, were stripped of their regulatory protection, allowing agricultural, industrial, and mining organizations to pollute at will. Wherever pollution initiates, it has profound effect on the environment over a large area of influence. Polluting chemicals seep into the ground to poison our water table. Wherever it is dumped, it also runs off in rain events to the smaller water bodies, which run downstream to the larger water bodies where water quality standards are still observed. So, in other words, the recent changes in water quality standards basically allow smaller wetlands, creeks, and streams to be polluted at will until it becomes a much larger problem and more expensive to deal with in larger bodies of water downstream. I'm not sure who came up with that rationale, but I can assure you there was no level of genius involved in it. The mindset is especially dangerous to the recreating public who hunt and fish in the uplands of our state. It becomes even more dangerous when the pollution flows downstream through small creeks and rivers into the tidelands of the coastal plain. It is here that these toxins, compounds, and chemicals, many of which were never meant to be interacting with the others, all come together in the water and in the substrate of our tidal estuaries, where the chain of life begins for all brackish and saltwater creatures who dwell and breed in these environments. So it is here that excellent water quality is so essential, not only to the small creatures who live in these waters, but to the bait catchers, the clammers, the oystermen, and the crabbers, and to the whole coastal economy that revolves around commercial and recreational fishing to nurture the multi-billion-dollar hospitality industry. This should be so obvious to all, but it was totally ignored during the last administration for the sole benefit of large polluting industries. Our whole way of life and quality of life is on the line in the wake of such foolish decisions. Not only do we need the initial safeguards for clean water to be back in place, the Clean Water Act needs to be strengthened, not weakened. We need research to be done to quantify the effects of new chemicals, compounds, and toxins and how they combine and interact in the environment. We need to also realize how foolish we were to allow electric power providers to burn so much coal, which emits so much mercury and other toxins into the air, later ending up in our waters through rainfall, and prevents recreational fishermen from eating their catch because of high levels of these poisons in the fish that they catch. There have been decades of inattention to these issues. In the coastal plain of the Atlantic Ocean, every living and working person is attached to the quality of water in a major way. And our waters, if our waters are pure and vibrant, the coastal estuaries will maximize their potential to provide new life, to fill our waters and nurture our economies quite vigorously. If we allow these waters to be fouled any further, I'm afraid that we will lose our traditional way of life in so doing. In the coastal plain of South Carolina, it is predicted that another 1 million people will live here in the next generation. There will be more demand than ever for the recreational and commercial use of our waters with each passing year. There will be more demand for clean water to bathe with, drink, cook, wash dishes, and flush down the toilet. We had better get a grip on where all that clean water is going to come from. And we had better manage every drop of water that Mother Nature gives us very efficiently. Clean water, yes, clean water will be the biggest social issue of the next generation and all those to follow in the coastal plain of South Carolina and in many other states. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Rick. It's a powerful statement. Passing it over to our last business panelist and our last panelist for the day, Ryan. And just before Ryan gets started, I would also just remind everyone to please shoot some questions our way, put them into the Q&A box there at the bottom of your Zoom. And after Ryan has given a statement, we will address your questions.
Hey, everybody. I'm Ryan Bethay from Oysters, Carolina. Thank you so much for listening to me. And thank you for having me. I'm going to talk about, Oysters, Carolina, our business. We grow oysters and then we distribute oysters ourselves as well as other seafood. I'm going to talk about the business aspect about that and how clean water affects it, since this is the sustainable business webinar. But before that, I've just got to say that it's really troubling that, we're talking about clean water, not just at the coast or the wetlands. We're talking about rivers and fresh water, the things that we drink, and it's a finite source. And for some reason, the previous administration was not treating it as such. So in the words of Mr. Baumann, it is foolish. It is foolish that certain things are kind of happening. So in terms of water quality affecting businesses at the coast, everything in our coastal communities, I'm from North Carolina. And so really we consider anything east of 95. Almost everything around there revolves around water. Our two main industries that we have are tourism and fishing. And, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how both of those are kind of affected. First, the tourism industry, whether you're going to go down to the coast to enjoy the beach, whether you're going to take a boat out, whether you're going to sit on your porch and look at the water, all those things are affected by water quality. And, again, this isn't just, we're talking about the eastern part of a state here, coastal part, but this kind of goes all the way back up into streams, rivers, lakes, bays, anything like that. If you enjoy water, then this affects you. Also in the South, in the East, really any coastal state has tried and has just put a lot of money into economic development. And in rural parts, which where I'm from is the coastal area, it doesn't work. You have to develop the industry that's already there. And so this, protecting our water is an inexpensive way for rural economic development, I guess is the best way to put it. So the way clean water is going to affect fishing, folks think that, we're talking about something that's going to affect rivers and estuaries. And so folks think that just because we're talking inland waterways, that doesn't affect open ocean. Well, in the fishing communities, all those fish that we catch, 50 miles offshore, all those started their juvenile lifestyle in our estuaries. Okay. So when you have, development and impervious surfaces and water runoff and polluted water coming into our estuaries, you're affecting the life cycle of fish hundreds of miles away that really an entire country depends on, right? If you're talking about nationwide, nationwide fishing. So, water quality really affects that. When you have juvenile fish living in these wetlands, that's what most of the people in our area fish for. So we fish for, flounder, things like that, fish that is going to bring a lot of money. These folks have been doing it for, our area is first contact from settlers. So we're talking centuries, not just a couple, not just decades or 150 years. We're talking centuries that these people have been fishing and using this resource to feed their families. And you guys, whether you're in North Carolina or not, have been eating seafood that's been fished from people in these families. A lot of folks think that water pollution is just or repealing anything that's going to protect our water is stopping people from just like dumping chemicals in the water, right? We definitely get water pollution that way, but kind of what Miss Lukenhoff was mentioning was impervious surfaces. So anytime you develop something, anytime you put a hotel, anytime a giant neighborhood goes in, large road systems, that ground before was used to filter water. Now that water is just going to run off and it's going to have less time to be filtered. So not only are we going to have flash floods and more water actually entering our estuary, but we're going to have dirtier water entering our estuary. What that dirty water does is, when I'm saying dirty, I'm talking about legitimately more turbid water, water that's less clear. When you have water that's not very clear, you don't have sunlight being able to penetrate that water. The sunlight, if it can't penetrate, the seagrass below it isn't able to photosynthesize. If the seagrass below it isn't able to, to get the sun, seagrass is just like, it's like the lungs, kind of like trees are the lungs of the land. It takes in that and it puts out oxygen. So all the fish and stuff in the ocean, they don't get oxygen from waves. They get oxygen from grasses and other, macroalgae, things like that in our waterways, giving them oxygen. So if we have water that's just, literally dirty, then we're going to have less sunlight penetration, which is going to create less seagrass, which has less dissolved oxygen. And that's what you see with like big fish kills, right? And so then you start having death, down food chains. And when you have that, it's really, really troubling. If for me, it's a no-brainer, right? Clean water is, the most important aspect, of our environment. But, we kind of have to put a dollars, I feel like you have to kind of make, people are kind of selfish, right? So you have to kind of give it in terms of them. And, when you take away these resources, you're going to be eating shrimp, fish, all kinds of stuff from other countries. And, local seafood is fresh seafood. So, just from the sheer amount of time it takes to transport. So, I think that's something to really think about. In terms of specifically oysters and specifically money in our industry, what we're seeing in North Carolina is we have these rainfall events, right? Like we've never had before. That stuff is kind of exponentially aggravated by more impervious surfaces, which we're trying to roll back, right? Development in the wetlands. We're trying to, curb that. And you have large amounts of water, even if it falls, 200-300 miles away, it's still with the impervious surfaces and without the filtration, it still is reaching us. And the Shellfish Sanitation is the department that keeps track of oysters, right? And their safety. So what happens is the rain comes down and it flows into our estuaries. The Shellfish Sanitation, they use an algorithm. So they use how much rain per 24 hours. If there's a certain amount, they shut the oyster farms down. Okay. So once they shut those oyster farms down, they actually have to go out and retest the water. So you're using lots of resources with that. Also, we've got folks that are, that are traditional oyster waters, like in North Carolina, it's the Stump Sound. Those guys are being closed 180 to 200 days a year. So if you can imagine running a business that's closed 2/3 of the year, you're not going to make any money. And this isn't something where somebody said, okay, I'm going to start this business and, they're not very smart about it. These are historical oyster lands, okay, oyster waters. So we've been getting oysters from there for a long time. And now we're actually seeing the change because of the pollution. And, it's making the oysters in that particular area unhealthy to eat 2/3 of the year. So health-wise, that's not good, okay? Because we have a lot of sustenance fishermen, so people that actually fish to eat. And then not only that, but you've got businesses that are developed here that are unable to operate. And so, this thing really, I think almost every panelist has mentioned it. It keeps going, right? Everything kind of like the problem over here affects this over here. And so it's really kind of troubling to see. And it's also a really important time to take this on. We're going to reach forgive the pun, we're going to reach like a saturation point on this. We're kind of coming up on that. And so it's really important for us to act on it. So I appreciate you guys listening to me, and thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you, Ryan. All right, we're going to move on to the question and answer portion of our roundtable today. And before I jump into that, I did notice in the chat, people are asking if we'll be sharing this recording. Yes, there will be a follow-up. We'll upload the recording and share also several relevant links we've mentioned throughout the webinar. So starting with our first question, we have one for the Congressman. Just one second as I pull it up. To go. Congressman, what is the most helpful thing that businesses can do to support your federal advocacy for clean water protections?
I don't think you can underestimate the value of having business support on environmental actions. I know when we were considering offshore drilling off the Virginia coast, there was a fairly strong consensus in favor. Only a few people, I was one of the few elected officials publicly opposed. We had a little help from the military because they said the offshore drilling was not helpful to the military operations. But there's very little political support until the Restaurant Association weighed in opposition to offshore drilling, figuring that if there was an oil spill, it would ruin their businesses. And when the Restaurant Association spoke out, almost overnight, the political landscape changed and everyone all of a sudden was opposed to offshore drilling. I wonder where we would be on offshore drilling, but for the Restaurant Association in the Virginia Beach area. And so I think the one thing the businesses can do is take a firm position to show, as this webinar is showing, that there is a business case for clean water, there's a business case for environment, and that empowers everyone else to speak out, and it really changes the political climate. So I'm just delighted to see the Sustainable Business Council speaking out, letting people know that they have not only support on the left, but also on the right.
Great, thank you. And our next question, we have a lot of questions. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to them all today, but we'll just keep going, and we'll have some follow-up, and maybe we can answer these questions in the follow-up as well. But this one is from one of our attendees, Anna Ree. And her question is, what is the main resistance to getting rid of the dirty water rule? Is this coming from non-point source polluters, such as industrial ag, or what other sort of industries are opposing getting rid of the dirty water rule, also the Navigable Water Protection Rule, as it's known officially? And I'm going to leave that question or open that to anyone on the panel.
This is Avi. I'll weigh in with a couple of thoughts. I do think that, as the questioner suggested, that agriculture, at least kind of what we may call big ag, has traditionally been opposed to the clean water rule that the Obama administration put out, and I think thereby supportive of the Navigable Water Protection Rule, also known as the Dirty Water Rule, put out by the Trump administration. I will say, though, that I think a great deal of that institutional opposition, if you will, was based on a lot of misinformation and kind of misleading commentary by political and other opponents of the clean water rules. There were and are a lot of significant agricultural exemptions already built into those rules. And let's face it, agriculture relies on clean water as well. So I think there's an immense case to be made that the agricultural community, from big to small, as well, ought to stand behind efforts to strengthen water protections and move forward with the Biden administration. But as I said earlier, there are a variety of industrial trade organizations that I think make it a pattern and a habit, if you will, to oppose strong environmental standards, whether they're air, water, or waste regulations. And that's why, as I said earlier, I think it's really critical that businesses like those represented here, like Congressman Scott alluded to, add the business voice for environmental protection. It exists, and it's one that we can make strongly and uniquely.
I'd like to also add a couple of points there. And, I don't think we have to name names. You can think of the large businesses that need to put pipelines through or large projects through and really don't want the burden of dealing with a regulatory requirement. But I have to point out as well, wherever there is a marginalization and disempowerment of communities, and we can see what's happened. We can see what's happened where there has been very little protection in place for a variety of reasons. We call a number of these sacrifice zones, but at the end of the day, they're poor communities, many Black and brown communities, Native American communities. And we can see not only less protection, and I'll say West Virginia, cold water mountain fisheries where raw sewage or discharges from coal mining facilities have happened. Those are resources that these people have depended upon for generations and who have respected them as stewards. Where businesses have come in and said, well, you know, we can't put it over there, but we can put it in this little Alabama community that takes hazardous waste, various waste from 48 states. And that's happening. So if anyone's questioning why to do this or, you know, where it's going to go, we can highlight where it's already happening. And now we have to figure out how we're going to make it right. And that's a challenge as well. So it's better, you know, prevention first versus pollution first should be the way we go, particularly if we're going to be fair and sustainable.
Thanks, Dominique. And we are past the hour here. So unfortunately, we do have to wrap it up. There's a lot of great questions out there and a lot of things we've left unaddressed, but we will keep the conversation going. We will follow up with this recording. We'll follow up with links to get involved and also ways to get in touch with the panelists. So I want to say thank you for everyone for joining and spending this hour with us. I want to thank the Congressman Scott, for joining us. Really appreciate you taking a full hour out of your busy day to spend with us and tell us about some of the great work you're doing. And we are all here and stand to work with you moving forward on clean water protections. And I want to thank all of our panelists today as well for joining us and providing us with some great testimony and information and discussion. Thank you all again, and we'll speak soon.